Phil Harris and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible fortnightly podcast, Dream Big, Move Fast.
A progressive, contemporary conversation on what it takes to be a dynamic thinker, leader, and role model.
Backed with over 2 decades of friendship, trials and tribulations, they teach from real-world experience and what it takes to dream big, move fast. Better before cheaper, revenue before cost, there are no other rules, Michael Rayner and Mumtaz Ahmed. Phil, what are your thoughts on this to kick off today's session?
Some pretty clear business principles, aren't they? If you follow those, you can't go too far wrong.
Yeah, and I like that whole conversation around like literally revenue before cost. Like you are never going to cost cut your way to greatness. Now, today we are going to talk about, being in property management, the growth business. And I know that you are super excited about growing property management businesses. And a lot of people are like, how can Phil be so excited about it? Well, he is. So take us on a bit of that journey. Because like literally when you think about property management, it seems that it's a little underdone when it comes to people really thinking about retention and also to growth and understanding how to actually grow it.
Yeah, it's I'm spending, as you said, a lot of time inside property management, particularly inside new business at the moment, so BDM department. And that hasn't, for no other reason than, probably the first part of Harris Real Estate obviously being very, very sales focused. There's only so much you can do at one time. In the phases of me, I started out listing and selling for the first kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then I kind of migrated, starting to get into more leadership, trying to get the sales team, build the sales management, kind of finally at this stage to say, hey, let's have a look at property management, largely looking across the industry, looking at what other people are doing. And sadly to say, Josh, I think it's a lot easier to go out there and find well-run sales team. There's a lot more officers put a lot more focus, Josh, in creating process system coaches. Let's get Josh Phegan in to come and work with our sales.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, let's get Josh in to come and work with our sales team. Mm-hmm. Let's get Josh to come in and help them list more houses. Let's get Josh to come in and help us to get more prospecting. You haven't got that same intentionality just isn't there for property management. But I think that what we are seeing now is that the needle is definitely swinging on that, in terms of wanting to resolve some of these things. So yes, I have been spending a lot of time inside the BDM department. And to a degree, Josh, it's probably been a little bit disappointing of my travels and my investigation of not really finding many solutions across the country of people who are really, really focused on mastery in that department.
So let's talk about it. The best lead sources inside of property management. What are some that come to the top of your mind straight away?
Well, the only lead source, if you cut out all the fluff across the country, the only lead source that really exists for the vast majority, I'd say 95%, is if by the grace of God a salesperson just flicks a referral through to the PM department. That's pretty much what it is. So a lot of people say, I think the definition for great lead generation inside a BDM department would say, if we said from now on, any lead that comes from the sales department, a referral, right? If that no longer classified as a lead, what would you do if you cut off sales leads out of your BDM department? What sort of lead generation does your department actually have? That is the true test of your lead generation strategy inside your PM department.
But I'd also say that you're completely devoid of any strategy at all. Because here's the interesting conversation. If I went in and I said, look, out of the last 100% of new managements that you've brought in, and I want you to think really clearly when I ask this question, what percentage of those landlords were in a position that they were adding new supply to the rental market? In other words, they had built a property, they were buying a property, they were taking their own home and they were turning it into an investment property. So it's new supply. It has not been leased out in the most recent period. Versus what percentage of the properties are takeovers where someone was clearly unhappy with either self-management or their previous property manager. And if you really go and have a look at that, that's like where there's been a significant incident, where there's been a challenge, where there's been, something that's gone wrong in the sales service component. And now someone's actually put their head up and said, you know what, I'm actually up for change. Now, this is a really interesting thing because if you're looking at going, well, what's the new supply? Now, if you go and have a look at it, Victoria has been hammered by a land tax, an investor tax, an Airbnb tax. 22,000 investors sold out of that marketplace in the course of the last 12 months. If you are a business principal running a practice in Victoria, thinking that new supply is going to save your pipeline is a really bad strategy because there's just not enough new supply. It's starting to turn right now. But arguably in the last 18 months, that has not been the number one strategy to win. The number one strategy to win is that I have to focus on takeovers and I have to learn how to really get into the mindset. How many business owners, principals, BDMs, property management teams would have done that analysis or started to think that way initially to then get into understanding how they could generate the leads if that's the lead source?
No, I don't think any. I think that property management has literally been a survival game and just hoping that you might get a few referrals that come along. And that might be me, but I get it. There are a few companies, you and I know, that actually are a lot more strategic than that. But as a blanket rule, very, very few.
Hey, Phil, would you like fries with that?
Sure.
Yeah, and what that is, that's an upsell.
Yep.
And so it was the beginning of how we all probably learn as young children about the important conversation of something called LTV, the lifetime value of a customer, and actually being able to improve how much people could spend. And so I was introduced to a term called recency, frequency, and monetization. So how recently has the customer been involved with you? So I saw you yesterday. Okay, great. That's yesterday. Okay, great. Frequency, I've now seen you 2 days in a row. So the likelihood of you spending money with me is higher because you've recently been involved, you're frequently involved, and now you've already spent $1 with me. How do I get you to spend $2? And so if you think about that as a foundational concept, the person who comes to a Starbucks every day and buys a coffee, if they come every day over the course of like 30 days, it's actually not that hard to upsell them into a membership and get them a cookie. So what you've got to start thinking about, okay, great, if we went through and I rang every single one of the, and you've got thousands of them, but every single one of your current landlords, and I said, hey, Phil, it's Josh Phegan calling from Harris. I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to look after you. Mate, I just want to see, is there anything else we could do to improve our property management services? And Phil, I just had a very simple question. Did you have anything else inside of your portfolio that we might be able to manage on your behalf? You might not be aware of the geographic expansion of Harris now across Greater Adelaide. So there's a lot more markets and opportunities that we can actually look after your investment properties for you. Did you have anything else? And Phil, a secondary question, I guess, is that, often when we work with a landlord, they also want to grow their portfolio. Did you have an appetite to grow your portfolio this year? Like if I saw something good, whether or not it's another apartment in a building that you're already owning or another house in a street you're already owning or something that I think could have development potential, would you want me to let you know about that and have a conversation around it? And then the third component is that, Phil, I noticed that yourself and your wife, Jen, there, that you live in a beautiful part of Adelaide. And mate, we've never been out to your principal place of residence to give you an idea on what it's worth. And that might have some extra equity that might allow you guys to make some different decisions in life about whether or not you do buy another investment property or whether or not potentially you upgrade or do something else with your existing home. Would you be open to us for me being able to get Arabella from our team out to come and give you an idea on what your house might be worth, just so you know where your equity position sits, then you can make some better decisions from there. So what you're really thinking about is about like learning, understanding that like one relationship can have multiple people that service it. And so what I do is I say, okay, great. I draw up on the board. I say, here is a landlord and who looks after the landlord relationship. And most people will say, it's the property manager or the property management pod, because there's some different functional things that people do and get fancy as your organization grows. But who's in charge of growing the landlord? And when you think about it, most property managers are really along what I got to call functional components of like, routines and ingoings and outgoings and rent increases and maintenance and all of those really critical components. Because if you don't get those right, that's the retention piece gone, right? But they don't necessarily think in terms of growth. And so what I do is I say, okay, great. I'm going to put the landlord at the center. There's going to be a property manager that's going to be in charge of the functional components of managing that relationship. But now I'm also going to apply a BDM or a property management growth specialist as the person who's going to assist in the growth of that particular client over time, through those memes that we've just showed. And then what I'm going to go and have a look at is I want to know how many whales have you got inside of your property management business. So in other words, how many owners have you got that own more than one property? And this was really driven home to me by a business in Canberra that we did some work with where there was a day where they lost a landlord. And when they lost that landlord, they lost 168 managements in one go. Now that's a big financial type company that own those properties. But what I'm trying to get you to think about is that literally, if there is a whale, then they also need to have a relationship with the director. So that way, if a property manager leaves or if a BDM leaves, they've still got a relationship with that key person, and it's a very important high-stakes relationship that takes multiple people to manage it. Now, you and I technically have a relationship in terms of how we do rerun training, for example, with Harris, but yet Heidi in your world and Kylie in my world organise all the logistics and the invoicing and the payment, all of those things, but that doesn't impact on our relationship. But it's really important because they make sure that our relationship functions. But I don't feel like that our relationship is impacted if Heidi rings me, and I'm sure you don't feel the same if Kylie rings you, because we understand that we're doing different functional components of managing that relationship. Is that too advanced, or is that like something that people have got to start to think about? Because inside of your PM software stack that you use, do you actually have an allocated property manager every property? Most people would say yes. But do you actually have an allocated BDM to every landlord? And that's interesting. And this really drove home to me. I saw this 19-year-old girl that I was doing work with up in Brisbane, and I was introducing her to this concept, and she said, "Oh, no, I can't ring the landlords." I said, "What's that?" She said, "Oh, because I'm only in charge of new business. So they have to be new to our business before I could talk to them." And just the interesting thing about how she'd interpreted the language or how she'd been told about that, she was completely closed to the concept of improving the lifetime value of a customer.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Josh. I would say that it is advanced, and we are not at that level, but that's certainly where we're progressing. I think that the majority of us are still just trying to get the basics in place. So as an example, you said, the first question is, what are the best lead source in property management? Well, the best lead source in property management for most real estate agencies is the sales team of actually mapping out, okay, rather than just kind of flicking through the odd lead.
But that's by luck and design, right?
Correct, which is why I'm saying your first step for everybody is to actually make it now by design and not by luck, which is go and put a strategy in place. How do we incentivize? Can they double their dough if they hit a certain figure? Can we actually get them on Mondays referring through leads of people who are looking for investment properties but haven't bought yet? So there's a whole strategy that you can apply there. And I think as you start to tick those kind of the low-hanging fruit off, Josh, for lack of a better analogy, then I think once you've got that in place with a solid team, then I think that where the industry is going to really, really be unlocked, Josh, for organic lead production is when you have actually got a team doing exactly those things. You think how much business is out there, and I don't know anyone, by the way, Josh, who's applying a strategy as dedicated as that.
Well, but the thing about it is, though, is that it's way underbaked. But now I'm going to challenge you. So, Phil Harris, you're an investor, right? And you and Jen decide that you're going to go and buy another investment property, not a development site, just a flat that's leased out. I dare you to go, and I'm going to be cheeky here, I dare you to go to your own website and try to find me an investment property to purchase.
Yeah, because I know you've beaten me up on this before.
Yeah. So, and any real estate agency in the country, find all properties currently available for lease that I could buy, that have already got an existing lease in play, that I can look at based on cap rate and see areas of opportunity for improvement. And what you'll find is that it doesn't exist. But one of the best at doing this was actually Defence Force Housing Australia, which is a government institute. But it's amazing around how they sell to investors.
Yes.
So I reckon that literally we're missing on that. So the investment property search or the conversation around it. And so it's really just about making sure that you've got some sort of a form of an STM, that you've got absolute clarity about what you're going to go and do in the business and how you're going to help people to go to make some better decisions so that then you can get there. But if a strategy is not documented, it's actually really, really hard to go and execute on it. And I would say to you, mate, it's actually not that hard, because when you think about it, okay, how many people have you got inside of Harris now? How many people work here?
A little over 300.
Okay, great. How many of them do you think know someone who owns an investment property that Harris doesn't manage?
Probably vast majority.
Okay, let's say 200 of them.
Yeah.
You get there's 200 in growth. Next after that, landlords. Now, you've got a lot of landlords. Roughly what percentage do you think the industry churn rate would be of landlords becoming archive landlords because they sell an investment property, they move into their investment property, or maybe they give the investment property to a competitor?
Churn rate sits at 15%.
Okay, great. So I'm thinking somewhere between 10 to 20, depending on which state and territory you're in and the rules of the day. Okay, how many people have inquired on fee, right, but you actually didn't get them, or were let by a competitor that you know about the property address?
Statistically, lots.
So, but there's heaps. So, you go into the major real estate portals, you take the address, you go and have a look at the data companies, you then reverse engineer that with ID for me. Now you've got a list of all property owners that own investment properties. Okay, great. How many tenants do you think already own an investment property? So they're rent investing, they're doing early stage renovations, early stage divorce, you get the idea. How many suppliers have you got? Plumbers, electricians, painters. How many of them own an investment property? How many developers do you know in Adelaide are now with things like the build-to-rent sector and affordable housing and social housing? Someone's going to need to manage all of that type of product. That's kind of interesting. And then you've got the sales team, and then you've got social proof. So how much of your social media is dedicated to generating new business in property management? Or where's your great campaign, for example, that it costs no more to get a quote for Harris to manage your investment property? And then after that, then there's acquisition. So, mate, I'm just taking you through a very basic STM. But what I'm trying to get you to think about is you've got to get seriously strategic if you want to be able to grow in this area. Thoughts on that?
I think it's incredible. And I think what you just said just scares a lot of people in terms of the how to get it done. But it's coming. People are, and we're one of those companies, Josh, that are really, really serious about taking, it's bit by bit. All of those strategies that you just spoke about, it's one at a time. and it comes back to your ethos on life and on business, which is playing the long game, which is you don't need all of those cogs activated operating today, but over the next month, how can we get one of those on board? Next month after that, how do we get that on board? Yeah.
Like I say, you might have 1,000 archive landlords. Let's ring them. But for a new business, you don't. So let's really lean into the tradies.
I go as far as saying, Josh, it's your ability to generate and organically go a rent roll. You don't have an idea problem, like you just rattled them off. You actually have an execution problem.
Yeah, and also too, you've also got a mindset issue in the way that you've trained your team about how the business works. Principle, you're either climbing towards a peak or a plateau. Are you there by choice or are you there by chance? Phil, what are your thoughts on this about whether or not are you in a position right now that you think that you're in a plateau in your life, or are you really climbing towards a peak?
We spoke about this at dinner last night, Josh. Kind of a bit of an awakening. I thought that I've probably more hit a plateau. It's interesting though, you say, are you there by choice or by chance? I think I'm where I am in life a little bit by both. Yeah, I've made some good choices, but also I've been very, very blessed. I had some things fall in my favour, so I think there's a combination of both. But yeah, I'm definitely ready to look for what that next peak is.
And I also think that actually you can use peak and plateau in lots of different areas of your life. So I might say, oh, look, on my fitness right now, I've actually reached a plateau. But yet, when it comes to my business growth, I'm really clearly climbing towards a very specific peak.
Yes.
So don't get too hard on yourself, mate. You're actually doing all right. But I'm just trying to get you to think that literally, sometimes you're on a plateau and you're there by choice, which is awesome. But the worst thing is to be on a plateau and not know how to get off it.
Yes.
So that's where the power of mentorship and business modeling is a really great conversation for anyone to be able to grow a great business. Feeling good and ready for more? Thanks for joining us
On Dream Big,
Move Fast.